and welcome to the Doofcast, a film and TV podcast from Doof Media. My name is Scott Daly, and I am joined by this very fancy new elf friend who isn't saying where he's from or really who he is, but he's promising to help solve all my problems, and that can't be bad, right? What was your name again, Sarah? I believe it was it Evil McEvilson?
No, it was Mordordotrineth, which...
Oh, well, that sounds good.
In Elvish, it's Evil McEvilson.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Shit. I should have I should have looked that up.
Yeah, sorry. Gotcha.
This week on the show, we are finally ready to take a look at season 2 of Amazon's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. We're going to be talking about all 8 episodes of the second season of this show. And let's just get this out of the way right now, Matt. We liked it. So those of you that are tuning in to hear us shit all over the stupid thing you hate, go away.
Yeah. Go elsewhere. Do not leave us a comment telling us you disagree. We don't care. Because there's plenty of other places for you to do that.
Yeah, so many. Also, please do not leave us a comment asking us if we're paid by Amazon.
Actually happened last time.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, we did a review of season 1 of The Rings of Power, which I think we both enjoyed overall. I mean, I think we were kind of like, this is pretty good. It's not great.
Yeah. Got some good stuff in there.
Yeah, and multiple times we're accused of being paid shills to Amazon. Now let me be clear here. Our YouTube video in which they accuse us of being paid shills to Amazon has 314 views on it. So what I'm saying here is that we are not big enough to be shills because no one's giving us money to talk about anything.
It's kind of a compliment, really, that you would think that we could be shills.
I know. I'm so touched, actually. Thank you so much. So that's all we're doing today. It's 8 episodes. It's 8 hours of TV that we have to find a way to talk about here in a little over an hour. So we're not going to try to add anything else to the episode. It's just going to be this. And Matt, I'm pretty excited to talk to you about this show, and I think it's because I really loved this season of television, and I'm curious what you thought of season 2 of The Rings of Power.
Yes. I liked season 2 of The Rings of Power more than season 1. I think it was a lot more solid. I think it had a lot more really amazing moments that I thought were some of my favorite Lord of the Rings moments, bar none. Some of them really snuck up on me. We'll go into the specific moments I'm talking about, I think, as we go. But, I think it, much like the first season, there were some plot lines that were a lot weaker than others, such that when you switch over to a certain plot line, you're like, okay, all right. But it was not like, I think last season, it was actually like extremely boring and I didn't care at all. And this season, I gradually began to care, such that by the end, I was like, okay, I'm basically into all of this. It's just some of it I'm like really into.
Yeah, I think the biggest, kindest thing I can say about this season of television is that they made me care about Numenor, which I didn't think was possible. And halfway through the show, I realized I was like actually concerned for those characters and what was going to happen to them. And I was like, whoa, that's surprising. I didn't expect that. That's great to hear. Yeah, I guess like before we get into it in a lot of detail, Matt, I kind of want to do like if someone is listening to this, they haven't watched the show, why should they take the time to go watch Rings of Power?
Sure.
What do you think? What's the elevator pitch for this television show?
Well, so if you really like Lord of the Rings and you really like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings and you want to see something that is spiritually consonant with that material, I think this is a good. I think you would like this. I think if you're the kind of person who's going to get really upset if like it's during the 4th instead of during the 6th or whatever that was supposed to do something, then I guess spare yourself. But like, I would just encourage you to not care about that. Like, I'm a pretty giant Lord of the Rings fan, honestly, but you just got to be able to be like, look, this is what we're getting, and just take what's good about it and what works, and what's good about it and what works is amazing. It's got again, I guess I don't want to be specific, but it's got some of the best like thematic crux moments of the franchise, if you want to call it that. I don't know. Do you have a good pitch in mind?
Um, I think the second season especially is a really fascinating like kind of journey into what is power and how power influences people. Like, the title of the show is Rings of Power, and this is a show, but especially a season about kind of the corrupting nature of power. And we see all these characters throughout every bit of it, either searching for or trying to figure out or how to get more power, and watch the ways that that fucks with them. And I think the show does a really fantastic job of taking characters that we know and characters that maybe we don't know as well from the Lord of the Rings lore, and put them in unique situations that I agree with you are spiritually true to what Tolkien was trying to do with his examinations of evil, examinations of lust for power, examinations of deception, and all these things, and created something that is touching, that is shocking and surprising in all the ways it should be. I think there's this weird thing that I kind of hate in TV sometimes, where you have to be like, "Hey, watch 20 hours of this thing, and then it'll get really good and it'll be worth it."
Uh huh.
I don't think we're quite there with Rings of Power. What I will say is you have to watch 8 hours in the first season of good,
Uh huh.
okay, decent television to get to the second season, which is I think 8 hours of excellent TV.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit more fair of an ask of a person. Um, I agree with you. If you are not one of those people that is like a real stickler for the lore, um, you're gonna have a good time with this, because I think the character work is just exemplary. And look, it's not a perfect show. I think we're gonna have complaints with some of the elements of the show. I certainly do. But yeah, I think when it is firing on all cylinders, it's incredible and engrossing. And there were brief moments in this thing where I felt like I was watching The Lord of the Rings, the films again.
Yeah. I think just to riff on that for a second, and again keeping clear of spoilers, like it's the only quote unquote television show that I've ever seen that really managed to hit this tone, where it really does feel elevated and fantastic and kind of like transcendent and glorious in particular moments. Um, it's almost like it's the least irony poisoned thing that I've seen on TV in like 10 years, right? Like it's very earnestly doing the things that it's doing,
Yeah.
which I don't want to say you never see that, because I famously don't watch that much television. But like it's a very particular thing they're doing, and they go all in on it.
They absolutely do. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, even though I felt season 1 was definitely weaker than this, I think it does build upon all of the relationships and conflicts defined in season 1, and take them in new interesting ways. I think here's the thing I'll say. One of my biggest complaints about this show, speaking non-spoilery, is the prequelitis of it all. There's
Mhm.
times when the show gets very like, this is a prequel and we have to set things up or show you things and be like, this is going to be this someday. You remember this? Well, here's how it started. Here's how Indiana Jones got his hat. There's moments of that in this show. There really are, and they are some of the weaker moments of the show for me. But the fact that the show can still feel surprising and shocking, even though we kind of know the broad strokes of where all this is leading to, I think is a testament to just the character work and the writing on display here for sure. Like, these are all like, I mean, it's true, right? Like every character in the show, you and I, and we're not Lord of the Rings experts, but we generally know where they're going to end up at the end
Yeah.
of this show. Like, we know broadly what choices they're going to make, where they're going to end up, what bad things are going to happen to them, and where this is all going to lead to. And there's a chance that that would just create a show that is absolutely dramatically inert. But I think the creators of the show recognized that everyone going into it knows where everything is going. And so the drama has to come from the ways the characters interact. So it's like it's not will this character make that decision or not? It's why they made the decision, how they were tricked into making that decision or not tricked, right? Or tricked by themselves into making that decision. What were they thinking about? What is their motivating factor? Why were they doing it? What did they think it would achieve? Where did they think it was going to go? That kind of thing. And that is, despite knowing it all, just engrossing.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, I think in conclusion, I really recommend you folks give it a shot. If you bounced off of the first season for whatever reason, I think I will not hold against you whatsoever. I do suggest giving it another shot because I think it becomes very worth it as you move into the second season. I had to watch the show over the course the past week because Matt like watched it all in 2 days and was like, okay, I'm ready to talk about Rings of Power. I was like, oh shit. So I was like, okay, I'll watch like 2 episodes a night. Didn't do that. Watched 6 episodes in one night and then 2 episodes at work the next day because I needed to finish the show. Yeah, it's propulsive, it's fun, it's funny, it's harrowing, it's uplifting. It's like think about the ways you felt while watching Lord of the Rings for the first time, and you get a lot of that. Is it as good of a show, good of a thing as Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings? No, it's not. But that's an unfair comparison because those are some of the greatest films ever
Yeah.
made. But it's very, very good, and it gets closer than anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, and just final comment there. I think it's doing some different things too. That it
Yeah,
maybe
no, fair. Yeah.
like the things that it's doing that Jackson's Lord of the Rings wasn't doing at all. Well, it's doing those things better because Jackson's Lord of the Rings didn't do those things,
Mhm.
which maybe sounds obvious, but I'm dancing around saying specific things that I want to say in the spoiler half is the truth. So
Yeah. So let's just put this part aside and let's jump into it. So Matt, where do you want to start? So there are obviously this is a show spanning multiple locations, multiple characters. We're jumping back and forth between storylines as they progress simultaneously across the 8 episodes of the show. Where the hell do you want to start?
well, I have a question for you, which is maybe uh, uh, reflect that question. Is what was the biggest surprise to you?
The biggest surprise to me was how much I was heavily invested in sexy Sauron and his bromance with Celebrimbor and that entire plot line of the story.
Yeah,
I think that is far and away the best part of the season, and I just did not expect that at all. Like I knew, like I think we went into the season with okay, at the very end of the last season, they made the 3 elven rings, and so this is going to be the season of maybe we're going to make the 7 dwarven rings, and I was like, okay, we're going to make those, and then we're going to send them off to characters I care about, and we're going to get to see how that works, and maybe by the end of the season we'll get the 9 rings, which we did. Um, but I did not expect the actual act of Celebrimbor making the rings and the way in which Sauron's manipulation of him throughout became like the core of the show. Like I just
yeah.
didn't expect that to happen. And not only is it the core of the show, but it is incredible character work. Like on both sides of this thing. It's so good, man. It's so
It's
good.
great. I agree completely. By the way, I almost like I pitched that to you, knowing what you would say because that because that's what I wanted to say. Like Celebrimbor went from being a character who I was not that interested in and sort of disliked him as a character. Like Celebrimbor, he's just kind of a stuck up elf, douchebag,
Mhm.
and um, went to just seeing him as this incredibly rich, tragic figure that I just felt for so much. Uh, uh, it's the through line from the Lord of the Rings that we all know and love that concerns like the love of the ring, the love of like the sort of jealous love of power.
Mhm.
This like sort of like Gollum's love of the ring, and the idea of greed and power and the lust for power and all these things being bound up together. And they're really good. Like they're really good at hitting the marks where they're like they emphasize like Sauron doesn't really like put ideas in your head. He just sees what you want or what you want to be, and he offers it to you. And that's
Yeah.
like exactly they're so consistent with that throughout this
Hmm.
whole season. But that's the thing with Celebrimbor is he sees what Celebrimbor wants to be, what he wants to accomplish, what he wants to make, and he gives him all the rope he needs to hang himself. And I mean, I guess the terrible tragedy of it is that really Celebrimbor does everything that he wants him to. It's just at the very last he's able um, to break out of his control and die with a little bit of dignity. But it was great. Like it was much better than I was prepared for.
Yeah. Well, not only die with dignity, but die because he, just like Sauron learned exactly how to push his buttons and manipulate him, he at the very end of this has kind of figured out Sauron a little bit.
Mhm.
And because in order to manipulate him, Sauron allowed himself to be a complicated character, which was another thing I was not expecting. Like I mean, if you had sat down 2 years ago and you said, "I think the coolest part about this show is the complicated ways I feel about Sauron, the
Yeah,
Dark Lord," I just never would have expected it. And I mean, like it doesn't damage my understanding of the character at all, like in the context of the Lord of the Rings. But I do think it's this very fascinating wrinkle on this character. You know, he is. There are moments throughout this thing where he is certainly manipulating Celebrimbor to do what he wants, but he's also having to let a little bit of himself out in order to do that. And
yeah,
so we get that wonderful moment near the very end of the show where he is kind of trying to apologize to for torturing him, for torturing Celebrimbor, and saying, "Well, this is just that you should have seen what Morgoth did to me." And like that's I mean, I don't know what your interpretation is. That's not him being manipulative anymore. That's just him bearing his soul and his
uh-huh.
scars and the things that were done to him and how they warped him into this person who firmly believes, just like everyone else in the show believes, that if I just am able to get this thing or accomplish this thing or get this level of power, I can make things better. And
Yeah,
it's like everyone, villains, good guys, everyone in this show is absolutely convinced of this central truth of I just need X, and once I get X, I can make everything okay.
yeah, and I think this is consistent with the lore. And you know, the thing about the Jackson movies is that Sauron is just a literal flaming eye. He's like
Yeah.
maximally dehumanized, but and basically the Lord of the Rings doesn't give us a lot of detail on who Sauron is as a person. It's really the backstory type stuff where you have to figure out like who is this person, and it's like yeah, he is a character,
Yeah.
um, and he wants power so that he can perfect the world, just like he says, and just you know, which by the way, like you just said, that's also what the elves want to do. They want to use their rings to keep the world in stasis and have it
Mhm.
be the way they want it to be.
Yep.
Um, yeah, the thing so the interesting thing the show did, which I like, is they basically made Sauron a narcissist. And but like in a way that's subtle, like there's a way to do that where I feel like it's just bashing you over the head with it and you're like, okay, I get it. But like it's just I mean, it's just it's a common enough personality type. It's not like
Yeah.
this is some weird thing because like what struck me was the scene where he literally does the narcissist's prayer to Celebrimbor, where he goes like, you know, I'm sorry that you're suffering so much. It's a shame you made me do this to you,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like they're far enough along that he's sort of totally tipped his hand to Celebrimbor, and Celebrimbor is like, you can deceive even yourself,
Yeah,
like
you're
that.
so good at deception, you can lie to even yourself. That's good shit, man. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was mad. And you know, that's the thing about narcissists and really everyone. The thing that makes narcissists the same as everyone else is everyone wants to be loved. Narcissists just want to be loved. And like I actually do think I'm all of this is sort of preamble to say I agree with you that he was showing his true self a bit there, because I think that Celebrimbor is probably the closest thing that he's ever had to like a partner of any kind,
Yeah.
in his own mind at least.
Yeah, and
um
and one of the things he wants is like this is such an important through line in I think Lord of the Rings lore in general is the act of creation, right? And the power of creation, and how these characters can't do it in the same way, right?
Hmm.
Like the idea that the song is the song and you cannot change the song, even your change becomes part of what the song is.
Hmm.
And both Morgoth and Sauron's like desire to create something, and like the thing that I love about the Celebrimbor Sauron relationship is Celebrimbor really wanted to create, he wanted to create something as well. He wanted this legacy. He wanted this, he's the best smith in the world, and he wanted to prove it, to make these pure, beautiful, wonderful things. And that's what Sauron wanted as well. Now he
Hmm.
wanted to do something different with them, but they are like working towards the same common goal, not just because of lies and trickery and manipulation, but because it's what they both want, and they both have the power to do it. And Sauron is so desperate to create something. His pride, when like, look, I think he even says it at some point in the show, is like, look what we created. We created something new, something that's never existed before, something that will be the most powerful thing in the world, and they're desperate for that.
Hmm.
And that is, I think, a very relatable trait.
Yeah, yeah, we all identify with that for
Yeah.
sure.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's so much great stuff that I don't want to just start saying random elements, but like they 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 do the smart thing where they use the fact that it's a visual medium. I'll say it that way.
Hmm.
Like there's a bunch of stuff. Like I love the fact that he has Celebrimbor like hypnotized or living in an enchanted world. I love all the scenes where first it's clear that he's just completely constructed a false reality for Celebrimbor, but then it's like slightly imperfect, and Celebrimbor starts like seeing that like
The
the
mouse.
mouse is on a animation loop, and um and I love the fact that like so it was funny. I wonder if you understood what was happening, because I didn't understand until later that like we see this scene where Sauron fails to get the mithril from the dwarves because the best character in the show, Durin, is like, well, actually, no, it's all well. Anyway, he doesn't get the mithril, and then we see Sauron with this knife, like cutting his palm with this badass knife, and I'm like, what's going on? And then he gives the mithril to Celebrimbor, and I'm like, okay, he got mithril somehow. We didn't see
Yeah.
that, and then you realize later that it's Sauron's blood, which is identical to giving his life force, which is like this is why the rings have his essence in them, is he gave up
Mhm.
some of his essence for the rings. Um, it's perfect. It's a
It,
visual way of doing that. I thought that was great.
yeah, and it's a fun bit of trickery, because like one thing that the show plays around with a lot is this idea that like, for the most part, we the audience know exactly what's happening, like
Hmm.
because we know this is Sauron from the jump. We are ahead of Celebrimbor on that front, and part of the pleasure of these scenes is watching how Sauron kind of expertly manipulates people around him, and you can kind of see him setting dominoes up to fall later, like with that one Smith girl,
Uh-huh.
who he's clearly um what is the name of the term I'm thinking of? It's one of the
Uh,
internet's favorite terms right now, and I
love
can't think of
bombing, gaslighting.
gaslighting. Thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
he's clearly gaslighting her, and then like just using her to like as just a chess piece that he's going to pay off with later. And like we the viewer can see all this happening, and we can know what's happening. It's like, oh man, you're really fucked, Celebrimbor. Like by the time you realize, it's going to be too late. And that's exactly the way it plays out. But at the same time, there are moments that are kept secret from us, like that, right?
Hmm.
There is a moment where he shows up with the bag of mithril, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You didn't get that. I saw that scene. You didn't get that. Nobody gave you that. Where did you get that from? And I literally just shrugged it off and go, oh, I guess
Yeah.
he had some extra. and
Right.
that's and
Right.
that's all I thought about it. And then yeah, then the reveal happens, and it's one of those moments that I was talking about in the intro of genuine surprise. Just like how do you accomplish genuine surprise in a story that I know all of already,
Yeah.
basically? And that's one of those moments.
Well, and it's surprise, but it's in a way that totally fits with what you're expecting in a fun way, because
Yes.
we've always heard forever that like Sauron infused his essence into the rings, and especially the One Ring, and that's why when you destroy the One Ring, you destroy Sauron. And it's
Hmm.
but like nowhere that I ever remember reading did it say like he physically like physically that's such a good way of showing it is all
Yeah.
I'm saying,
Yeah,
um
and I think maybe this is the place to say, like, factually, is this show, like, matching what Tolkien wrote in the appendices? No.
no.
Like, all this everything that has happened in these 2 seasons in the appendices takes place over hundreds and hundreds of years amongst characters that are not even in existence yet, right? Like, the show has taken everything in the appendices and basically squashed it down into a few years. Things are happening at the same time, things are happening much quicker, but that's TV, man. Like, you
Mhm.
can't, like, that's just one of the things you're gonna have to do, and I think they really did a good job at it. Like, you could tell me, like, I don't actually know if the dwarves unearthing the Balrog had anything to do with the Rings of Power.
I don't know. um I think what we discovered when we were talking about this the other day is that like the rings made the dwarves avaricious in a
Yeah.
way they hadn't been before,
Mhm.
which led to all sorts of stuff. Like I don't think we're going to talk about the Arkenstone in this show, but like that's a whole big thing with the dwarves,
Sure. Yeah.
and the greed for the greed for the mithril. I think it's plausible to say that the rings awakened the greed in the dwarves, and thus they dug too greedily and too deep, and
Yeah.
and so it's causally related. It's just not like literally the guy who got the first ring went nuts and started digging.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but you got to dramatize things.
Right. I mean, totally, and that's why I'm so on board with all of this. Is it like, yeah, things did not actually, and I put actually in quotes there because none of this actually happened, but things did not happen this way in Tolkien's writing of the history. Not exactly, but they're playing fast and loose, but getting the major beats. Like, I mean, this show still constructs this idea that the Elven rings are free from Sauron's influence because he did not actually have a hand in creating them, unlike we see, that moment with the dwarven rings where I love that Celebrimbor pauses but does it anyway when Celebrimbor is about to drop the mithril into the pot to forge the dwarven rings. Like, Sauron just goes, no, give me it. And Celebrimbor is like, he pauses for a second, goes, wait, why? Like, his face says this. He doesn't say it. He's just like, why? And then he just does it. And then you see Sauron like close his hand on it and then drop it in. And then we're like, okay, that's why those rings were that way. We obviously know the freaking rings for men were forged with his blood. So that all lines up exactly to how things work out. The timing doesn't work out exactly. I'm pretty sure the One Ring was already forged by the time um um Eregion fell. Like, I'm pretty sure that's the case. But who cares? Who
Yeah,
cares? Like, I don't care at all.
yeah,
It's taking all these various things that take place over thousands and hundreds of years, and it's saying, how can we make a story out of this? How can we make character beats out of this? And that's what it does.
yeah. So talking about the fall of Eregion, it's a nice jump off point to talk about my other favorite thing, which was the surprise, following the thread of surprise,
Uh-huh.
which is Adar,
Hmm.
character who is obviously not in the lore at all. And I love this
Is that true?
because,
Is he like just totally made up
oh
character?
gosh, I don't think he's in the lore. I can check, but
I mean, I believe it.
yeah,
It,
so the only thing that's in, so here's what I think. I'm not going to look it up right now, but I'm like pretty sure of this. Tolkien never knew where the orcs really came from. Like
yeah.
he literally changed his mind from they were like swamp creatures that Morgoth created out of nothing to they were elves that he like tortured and corrupted. And it's like Tolkien was like unhappy with both of these answers because it's like, wait a second, so you can like corrupt a soul with like black magic? Like that seems really like shouldn't this is a very Catholic perspective, but it's like shouldn't every soul have a capacity for redemption?
Yeah.
And if and like isn't it kind of messed up that we have this like disposable race of just like damned evil creatures that are totally irredeemable?
Mhm.
He was never happy with it. He didn't really know what to do with it ever. So the show, I think, does this really clever thing where they say, we're sort of going to provide an answer to this sort of. And I think this is all new to the show, where it's like you got this guy Adar who was an elf, um, who almost tells us what his name was. I thought they were going to tell us what his name was, and it was going to be some name from the lore. And then we could be like, oh, that's the. But it's like, no, it doesn't matter. Is the
I was
point
totally ready to write it down so I could look intelligent on the show later, and then yeah, they didn't do it.
totally? And like he's corrupted by Morgoth with evil magic, and then I think also manipulated by Sauron directly
Mhm.
to who his part in this is a little ambiguous, but I think it doesn't really matter. It sort of more like thematically matters that Sauron has a hand in why things happen this way, and he was able to have children, which are the orcs. And I love the sentence when one of the orcs is like, "Do you still love us, Father?" And he's like, "I love you with all of what is left of my heart." and Adar, like he went from being again a character last season where I was like, he's okay, he's the bad guy,
Yeah, I
whatever.
didn't give a shit about him last season.
Didn't
He was
didn't give a
just
shit
a
about him, and
bad
now
guy
he's just like,
surrogate.
oh my god, he's such a amazingly deep, tragic figure. Um, and I think at a certain point I knew that there was no way that things were going to turn out well for him. I mean, because that Sauron like wins, right? So,
Yeah.
um, but the perfection of having his own children betray him to Sauron, and then having the betrayal scene perfectly mirror the scene where he betrayed Sauron in the first episode.
Yeah.
Um, and then as soon as Sauron has control over the orcs, like one of the last things that happens in the last episode is the orcs are like, "Oh, sorry, master, the dwarfs came," and Sauron just kills him
Yeah.
immediately out of just like mild annoyance. And the orcs are like,
We fucked up.
"Oh." And they deserve it. That's the
Yeah.
thing. That's the like that's the beauty of it, is like, oh, so the orcs damned themselves
Mhm.
by their actions.
But at the same time, you can kind of understand because Adar essentially became what he was trying to stop Sauron from doing to his
Mhm.
children, right? Like he killed. I think this cycle of that opening scene to his final scene, as you pointed out, is so perfect because like we see in that opening scene, the first thing Sauron says is like, "Look, I'm your lord now. We're gonna go to war with Middle Earth. A lot of you are gonna die," and
Mhm.
they're all like, I don't want to do that. And so Adar kills him, takes control with the idea of these are my children. I love them. I don't want them to die. I don't want them to become a warmongering death race. I want them to just get to live and have their own place in the world and existence. And that's what he wants. But his drive and desire to end the threat of Sauron and end this fear he has of the existence of Sauron drives him to essentially become Sauron, which is another way the show perfectly mirrors Galadriel's quest to kill Sauron
Mhm.
and what that is, that corrupting influence on her that is. And it's just so clever and well done that yeah, by the end you see it coming. Like this is another instance in my mind of what the show does such a good job of is yes, you're absolutely right, Matt. We knew that this guy was not going to win. We knew that he was going to die. That Sauron was going to take control of the orcs eventually. Like we know this, but the show knows that we know this, and so instead of like trying to surprise us with the dramatic, sad betrayal of Adar at the end, it kind of builds that up slowly over time
Mhm.
to where when it happens, we just see it coming
Yeah.
because we've already known it. It slow builds this idea of just this wonderful concept that I just couldn't get enough of the concept of there's a orcish army outside of Eregion, but not because they really want to like kill all the fucking elves, just because they know Sauron's in there and they
Yeah.
they want to they want to get him, which is such a fun twist on everything that we understand like these stories in this world to be. And I just got so much out of that. But we see that he's willing to sacrifice his people, like he's becoming exactly what he hated. And so the ending just works perfectly where you're like, yes, the orcs made the wrong choice and damned themselves, but you can kind of understand because you have the person who said they loved you and were going to protect you is treating you like shit and putting you in harm's way and is obsessively trying to destroy you. Now,
Yeah.
would I in that situation gone, okay, I'm gonna go back to that other guy? No, probably not. But you know,
Yeah.
who else? Like,
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I think Adar says to one of them, sort of the one that we keep seeing. We kind of see him as the lieutenant. He
mhm.
says, basically, I would rather you all be dead than fall under Sauron's sway again. And like this orc clearly hears that as like, oh, he's become crazy and evil, and he doesn't actually care about us,
Yeah.
when actually that's just a reflection of Adar actually knowing how bad Sauron is,
Mhm.
and that he's going to subject the orcs to a sort of like totalitarian control and just domination
Yeah.
that none of these orcs have ever experienced. That was one thing. I was unclear on how much time was supposed to have passed between killing Sauron and Sauron sort of bootstrapping himself back up to existence. I felt like it was supposed to be a long time, but the
I
the
think it
show's
was. The show plays very loose with time periods
yeah.
because I think the show knows that this stuff occurred over hundreds of years, and instead of directly telling you no, that's not the case, they're just like, "Hey, who knows? Like, how long did it take that? Like, the time that passes in this season of television, how long was that? Like, how long were they working on the rings? Like, it could have been years. It could have been days.
Yeah, I think the only thing that makes it not years is that we have certain human characters who don't seem to age, but
Yeah.
then you could also be like, well, maybe these things aren't happening at the same time. I don't know.
We also have like Galadriel like desperately like sprinting to try to get there in time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
oh no, the bridge is out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't I think it's my guess is probably like months to years. Um
Y- Yeah, I think I felt like years, but because it doesn't like actually, I mean, basically, I feel like that scene was supposed to have happened relatively soon after the fall of Morgoth.
yeah.
Was kind of my interpretation, and then it's like, well, that was definitely a long time ago.
Yeah.
So
I
I don't
think
know.
you're right. The him putting himself back up together where he becomes, the human form we see in the first season, I think was over the course of years.
Yeah,
I think so.
I just mentioned that because I thought it was a really delightful choice to begin the show that way, and just
Hmm.
a fantastic sequence to have Sauron sort of revealed as what I kind of see as his true form, although I know there's kind of no such thing, but he's like a black slime monster
Hmm.
and like viciously eats a woman,
Yeah.
and then is like, hot young Sauron that we know and love. And it's like, and then like the reason I mentioned this is I kept remembering this over the whole rest of the show. I kept like every time he would sort of be like charming, I would like try to remind myself like this is a literal black ooze monster who ate a woman who's just pretending.
Hmm.
And like as sort of humane as he seems, and like sensitive as he seems at certain moments, it's like, yeah, they always make sure to throw in the moment where he's like he's talking to that elf smith woman like that you mentioned before, and he's like, oh yes, you're so loyal, you'll definitely be rewarded. And then one episode later he just shoves her off the edge of the parapet for a slight distraction, like
Yeah. Well, because he makes it seem like Celebrimbor did it, because
yeah,
Celebrimbor bumps her and he
yeah,
just throws her off the parapet. Yeah,
yeah.
because these are all just chess pieces for him. Because like I think let's be clear here. This show makes you understand Sauron.
Hmm.
It's not going to be like, oh, he was misunderstood. Actually, it's like, no, no, no. This guy is evil. This
Yeah,
guy is evil incarnate. Just because we understand a little bit more about where the evil is coming from, and we can see him be vulnerable and honest, doesn't mean we are his buddy now. No, certainly not.
yeah,
Um,
right.
but it is like, I mean, his final fight with Galadriel, who's a character that I guess pretty mixed on in the end. Galadriel's portrayal in the
Hmm.
show, but I really did like their final confrontation at the end, and I liked like in his mind, he maybe actually did believe that he would win her over to his side.
Yeah,
Like I think he did,
yeah.
and
I think he thinks that he can manipulate anyone,
yeah,
and when he fails to, it makes him super mad.
yeah.
I think that's true. I think he really did want her for his queen. And I mean, in his twisted worldview, it's like really he would be domineering and dominating her just as much as anyone, but it reflects well. Her golden light reflects well on him. Um, Makes him seem cool, right?
Hmm.
That's what he wants.
Yeah.
I think I mixed is a good word. I think over the course of the season, I came to better understand what they're doing with Galadriel and
Yeah.
where she is in her journey. Um, in the first season, it just seemed more like she was just chaotic and hot headed.
Yeah.
And in this season, it was more like, no, there's like a clear driving force, which is she just desperately wants to kill this one specific guy because she really thinks he's super evil, and he is. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's much easier to understand, right? It's like, well, yeah, sure, you should want to kill Sauron. That makes sense. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, like the kind of through line of this season is like you want to kill this guy so bad, but you allowed him right under your nose, and like, what does that say about you? Like the insecurities that brings in her. Like she's trying to be this driving force, but people around her are doubting her ability, and that is reflecting her own self doubt. Is like, when I confront this guy again, have I already been swayed by him and I don't even know it yet? And then that underlying fear that drives her, I think, is really interesting. I think it's
mhm.
just kind of weird that like the actual like beat to beat plot movements of that through the story are most of her just like being captured and then just chilling in an orc camp for episode after episode after episode, and she like gets a satisfying conclusion at the end of the season that I really like. But I don't know, I just feel mixed on it. And this is actually okay, this is one complaint. We will have complaints.
Okay,
Here's one. So the end of the season, for the elves at least, is all of the elves gathered in. Is that supposed to be like proto Rivendell? That was
maybe.
my guess. Um, and they're basically just, okay, what do we do now? What do we do next? And it was like, we can go out and gather everyone together and strike out against him, or we can basically collapse into Lindor and like protect ourselves as we build strength. And so it's like, the sword or the shield. And it was like, well, they're all thinking about, well, what should we do? What should we do? And they go, Galadriel, what would you do? Um, and this is, I think, a really interesting question to pose to Galadriel, because I believe the Galadriel we had seen up until this moment would unquestionably go sword, right? Like,
Mhm.
we need to strike out against him now. We need to go now, now, now. We have to get him. We have to get him. Like, I believe that's who that person was created to be. So I was really curious now. I was like, oh, is this a moment to show a character change, that maybe she'll say, no, no, we need to regain our strength. We're tired. Like, we need to figure this out. And I'm not going to be the person that is constantly driving and striving for moving forward. But then instead of making that clear, what she does say is she quotes back to a Celebrimbor speech from earlier in the show about, the power of the light, which is a really cool speech. It's very Lord of the Ringsy. I really liked it, but I was not clear when we leave them at the end of the episode what they're gonna do next.
Yeah,
So like, maybe this is just being me stupid. Like the High King literally takes out his sword and holds it up, and everyone yells. So maybe that's like, they're gonna attack. That's what they're gonna do. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to take away from it. But it just like, I just was confused by this very clear like possible character choice moment that had her call back to her time with Celebrimbor, which again like lined up with, I think, one of the overarching themes of the season, but didn't necessarily land for me on like, what where is this character right now?
yeah. So what's it's simply unclear to me what light is a metaphor for here. Like beyond the generic sense in which light is like good, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, that's way too broad. Um, like this is me reaching here right now, but it's like we know that ultimately there's an alliance of the free peoples of Middle Earth
Yes.
that leads to the defeat of Sauron. So it's like that's one manifestation of light, is it's like having faith and goodwill and forgiveness and willingness to reach out across boundaries. This is all light, and it's probably true that the elves would have lost if they had just like immediately attacked alone. they needed the armies of Gondor, which there's no Gondor. So I don't know how we're gonna. I think what's honestly gonna have to happen is like next season they're gonna found the kingdom of Gondor out of the like refugees
Yeah.
from Numenor, which is gonna also be destroyed next season.
So yeah,
Spoilers. Um,
I was trying to figure that out because like we have who's Isildur's father again? I can't
um,
remember.
Elendil, right?
Yeah, yeah. Elendil is leaving Numenor with Narsil,
Uh huh.
and like essentially the way the lore works is that Numenor is destroyed, but a small pocket of Numenorians escape from the destruction of Numenor. They're led by Elendor, and that is what goes on to eventually found the kingdom of Gondor, right?
Hmm.
Well, there's two different people, right? You get it, you get it. But
Yeah.
it's a lot more complicated than that. But like this
Yeah.
is essentially what happens. But now, like he's left Numenor already. It is going to be destroyed for sure. Like
Yeah.
that has to happen.
Yeah.
But I guess is he going to like meet up with his son, and they're going to go back to try to like, is there going to be like a Numenorian civil war we're going to see in the next season where they try to wrestle power back and ultimately the city is destroyed? Maybe, I
Y-
guess. I don't know.
Well, I think so. I don't know if I don't know how people feel about like spoilers from the lore, right? But like, isn't what happens like the Gondorian sort of like Valar elf loyalists leave, and then don't the humans actually literally like sail for Valinor, and
I don't remember.
somebody at some point in the lore tries to invade Valinor and they get completely stomped.
That
Like
seems
like
like what the current stupid ass king of Numenor would do. So,
I think that
sure.
might be what happened. Man, see now I realize I'm a little fuzzier than I thought I was when I opened my mouth. But basically, yeah, then the gods destroy Numenor and then they make the world round so that nobody can ever get to Numenor again. Um, so
It's a lot of shit that has to happen.
yeah,
I mean, that is one of the interesting things about compressing all this timeline together is you're right. Like Gondor has to be founded. They have to build Minas Tirith, right? Because Minas Tirith existed in that war
uh-huh.
already, right? Like, did it? I think it
I
did.
I think
I'm not
so.
actually sure.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna care too much. Like I think we're just right about what's gonna happen. Is they're gonna found the kingdom of Gondor, and there might be a bit of a time skip, but like Elendil and Isildur have to be around for the
Yeah, so it
battle.
can't be that much of a time.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
can't
I
be.
know Numenorians live like longer than
Yeah,
regular people, but still not like elf levels.
yeah,
So
right.
yeah,
Yeah, it's funny because the first season we were like, is this that Isildur? And I'm like, I'm
yeah.
pretty sure it is.
It
Um,
is clear to me now that it is. They're just like as soon as Narsil shows up in it, I was like, okay, okay,
yeah,
yes, this is what we're doing.
yeah, absolutely. Um,
What were we
there's a
talking
bunch.
about? I don't even remember. Galadriel, I think.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of other stuff to hit on. Like, definitely wanted to talk about how I really enjoyed what they did with Elrond this season because I really like the actor. I like his portrayal of Elrond.
Yeah, me too.
I, there was nothing about the first season that I disliked, but this season just made him a lot more complex. Like the first thing he does is he tries to steal the ring and hide it, and he's like a refugee, like a fugitive fleeing from his own king, who he's seemed to be totally loyal to this entire time, and like this
Yeah,
conflict between him and Galadriel. So often I'm annoyed by like manufactured conflicts between characters who should be friends, but this was one time where I was like, no, they just have a legitimate disagreement. And Elrond just sees these rings as a totally unacceptable risk, and you can kind of see both of their perspectives actually.
yeah,
In fact, we actually happen to just know that the elf rings aren't corrupted,
yeah. We know he's wrong, which is an interesting place to be. Yeah,
but his perspective is one where you'd be like, yeah, if I was in his position, I would feel the way he feels.
totally. Yeah.
Um,
If your friend comes to you and says, "Hey, remember that guy that helped us learn how to make these magic rings?"
uh-huh,
Turns out
uh-huh,
he's the big bad guy.
yeah,
So can we put the rings on? No.
yeah. But I promise, look at them. Look how pretty they are. Look how alluring they are. Yeah. Um, and like it's honestly kind of creepy. I liked it because he gives the ring to Círdan or Círdan gets the ring at some point,
Mhm.
and Círdan is like, I totally changed my mind. The rings are actually great, and like for you can kind of see from Elrond's perspective, it's like, oh no, they got to him,
Yeah,
where it's like,
yeah.
no, he's just right actually.
Well, I
Um,
mean, that is the interesting thing about this, and that is, I think, maybe one place where the show could be a little bit more clear on this. Is it want like those early episodes? It wants you to actually be worried about, are these rings good or not? Like, this is, I mean, this is a show that's using a lot of the same imagery and even
mhm,
music at times of the Lord of the Rings, and it is playing up the idea that when we look at these rings, we see them as tempting, alluring. Like, it uses phrases from Lord of the Rings. Like, it loves using the phrase precious. Absolutely loves it.
yeah,
Every Lord of the Rings thing loves throwing the word precious into it.
yeah,
But I think there are moments early in the thing where you do think like he literally like is sailing out into this like gulf in the world, right? Where he's about to drop these three rings, never to be seen again. His boat is bumped right before he does it, and it happens to like slightly open the bag that the rings are contained in, and
uh-huh,
so he looks at them for the first time and then goes, "Oh."
yeah,
And then immediately changes his mind. So like
uh-huh,
I think it's totally fair as a viewer if you don't know that, hey, no, actually these three rings they're good. Um you would go, "Uh-oh.
yeah,
Uh-oh." And I don't know if the show does like a really good job of dissuading you of that. I mean, I think by the end we understand because like I think that's the moment where Sauron is demanding Galadriel hand over the ring, and it seems like she's about to, but then she doesn't at the end, and it's like,
mhm,
oh no, like if he had any control over these rings, that would have worked, and it didn't.
yeah.
So they're good, but I do think it plays too uh uncertain with that idea for
Yeah. So
me.
I agree with you. I'll kind of steel man it, and I'm not saying that the show does this, but I think lore wise, the way I chose to view this in my own mind is this show made me think more about Tolkien's like political philosophy than I usually do,
Interesting. Okay.
because when you think about it, he he has some pretty specific ideas about like the nature of power and how that pertains to leadership and rulership and governance. And like Sauron, his plan, like just step back from it and think about it in very concrete terms. Like his plan was, I'm going to make, I'm going to, help make the means for centralized control to be exerted over population centers. I'm going to give the dwarves these rings of power. I'm going to give the elves these rings of power. I'm going to give the men these rings of power, and that's going to take particular individuals in those communities and make them super powerful, meaning politically powerful. Like they are
Mhm.
the leader, they're the ruler. They can do things other people can't do, and people follow them. And then after I've done that, and I've sort of made the whole world a little bit less democratic, a little bit less localist. It's a little bit more centralized and authoritarian. But but there are many authoritarian centers. There are 19 authoritarian centers. Then I get my ring, which has control over all their rings, and now there's one authoritarian center because I can dominate the wills of all of them, and through them dominate the wills of every living creature in Middle Earth. It's a political plan. Like
Mhm.
it's very it's very practical, and it really speaks to Tolkien's view of how power works. And it really made me think a lot more about how like the hobbits who are always described as like good, um they're typically much more like democratic, like not perfect, like no one in this book in the story is really democratic, because that would just be like kind of anachronistic, but
Yeah.
more like localist,
Mhm.
more just like, hey, we don't really have the time or energy for this whole like having rulers and an aristocracy thing. We're just humble hobbits. And Gondor, like they have the stewards and they have like it's a lot more loose with the power structures. I'm gonna just wrap this up and bring it back to the point of the elf rings, because you were talking about the elf rings and them being kind of overly wishy-washy about what they're doing with the elf rings. And it's like, I think Tolkien thinks that the mere existence of a ring of power is dark
Mhm.
in and of itself, even if it hasn't been corrupted.
Sure.
And I think that's the way in which it's like Círdan sees them as beautiful, and they're like they haven't been touched by the evil of Morgoth or whatever, but they're still a ring of power, which means you're elevating one elf over others. Um,
Yeah. No, I like that. I think that fits. That's kind of, as you were talking, I kind of predicted where you were going to go, because I think that that seems just kind of self-explanatory when
cool.
you play it out like that. Yeah, it's like, yes, the ring is not evil, but it's also not good. And I
Yeah,
mean, like, the framing device of this is essentially like, the world is saying, "Hey, elves, it's time for you to move on from this place. Like,
yeah,
your time here has ended. Like, your power here is waning. You need to go to the west. You need to move on." And via the rings, they just basically say, "Nuh-uh, no, we're not going to do that." And I think the show doesn't necessarily frame that as a good thing, and
hmm
that makes sense. And so, yeah, no, I like this. I like this interpretation a lot.
yeah. I totally agree with that. The sort of clinging on to the good old days magically when they probably should have just left
Hmm.
is actually probably part of the sort of more mundane sort of corruption of the elves. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Um,
well, there's several other plot threads
We've
we
been
haven't
almost
touched
talking
on at
about
all.
it for an hour, and we've got a lot of more things to talk about. So let's talk about the best character on the show.
Okay.
Let's talk about Durin the Fourth,
Yeah.
the now king under the mountain.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Man, so this was my favorite character and my favorite plot line from the first season. I thought Durin, and especially his friendship with Elrond, and how that uh, worked through the course of the season one, I just really loved, and I was so happy that they just kind of picked that up where it was and just continued it along. I still think Durin is a fascinating character. Obviously, he got less interaction with Elrond in the season than in the first, but his interaction with Elrond in this season was so fucking tragic, man.
Yeah.
It made me so sad, because like, you just like, when Elrond is like repeating over and over again, Durin will be here. Durin
Yeah.
will be here. Durin will come. Like, it's, and like, he wanted to, but like, shit's popping off at home and he can't, like,
Yeah.
this is, there's a lot of understandable like tension and animosity between these two peoples. And like, you can see how like one side views it as, you abandon us in our time of need, where the other side views it as like, we got our own shit going on here. I mean, that's kind of how the season for Durin ends, right? Is like, he's now in control, and they would love to like join forces with the elves to rid the threat of Sauron forever. But the like, immediately it's like, look, here's the problem. We've got lots of other dwarf lords that now feel they're owed stuff. They're coming for it. Some people are making claims to your throne. Like, there's going to be this whole kind of dwarf civil war and infighting that's about to go on here. And so you can totally see how they're not going to be able to assist with this larger problem.
Yeah.
And it's he's such a I feel like we've been using the tragic nomenclature. Like, he's not necessarily a tragic figure, but like, you just see like, he's trying so hard.
Well,
And I actually loved that the way this season handled his conflict with his father, like, was the inverse of what they were arguing about last season, right? Like, last
mm,
season it's like, no, we need the elves, we need the help of the elves to do these things, we need it. um Come on, why don't you understand, why don't you trade with the elves? And then his father was adamant, and that gets him disowned essentially. And this season it's like, dad, stop with the elf stuff.
yeah.
Please, we need to step back from this stuff. And yeah, um I was a little shocked at the immediacy with which the ring like completely messed up the elder Durin. Like, that's why we had that conversation the other day, because I looked it up, because I was like, were we meant to believe that the rings like were like the one ring and immediately corrupted the person the second they put it on? And yeah, I mean, maybe not quite that way, but as you said, they're dramatizing like this effect, and
Yeah.
it ultimately works.
Y- Yeah, I think it definitely doesn't keep with the lore, but I also really liked it, and it was really. I'm just gonna shamelessly keep using the word. Like, it was extremely tragic watching the fall of his father, who
Yeah.
who was this noble figure who like he was hot tempered, he was, stubborn, which is that, like, dwarf quality, which is a double edged sword in many cases. But you're sad to see him fall, and you're, because he's Durin's father, and you feel for Durin. But
Mhm.
you said a second ago that Durin, our Durin the Fourth, is not necessarily a tragic character, and I feel like maybe he will be. I feel like we're
Yeah.
setting some things up. Like there's a moment where the camera really kind of pauses, gives us some time with it, where um his wife asks him to swear never to put on the ring, and he says, I swear I will never put on the ring. And it's like, I immediately was like, oh, like, what, like, that's going to turn out to be a huge pain in the ass that he swore that.
Yeah.
Because the thing about his character is, I bet he won't. Like, I bet he never will put on the ring, but like, there'll be a situation where it would have been really convenient to put on the ring,
Yeah.
um and he won't be able to.
Yeah, I mean, that's like in a world where these rings exist, like it's, I mean, it's a a nuclear weapon metaphor
Yeah.
essentially, right? Like in a world where these things exist, if you have people willing to use them, choosing to use them might seem noble and is, but like okay, well
Uh-huh.
that's not going to do much for you if you're bombed.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it just kind of changes the calculus of everything, and I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot to do there, and I think it's going to be really interesting. I'm really excited where this story
Yeah.
goes.
I love that the elves, like, I like the characterization of the elves. I think, like, one thing about Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson, etc., is like the elves come off as being kind of just like above everything and better than everyone. And I think that works for that story, because that story is sort of being told by hobbits.
Mhm.
Um, but this story is much more in keeping with, I think, like the Silmarillion, where the elves are like these vain, prideful, emotional. They're more fey, honestly, in the Silmarillion, and in this story. And I mentioned that because it's like the elves are totally manipulated by Sauron consistently, because they're so emotional
Mhm.
in that particular way. But then Durin, the only interaction that he has with Sauron, he just has no time for his shit. He doesn't see through him in the sense that he can tell that he's Sauron, but he's like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
And why are, like, he seems to be full of shit,
Yeah.
actually. Um,
No, yeah, that's such a great point because like so Sauron comes to Celebrimbor and basically says like I'm not human. I'm I'm a magic being sent down here to specifically help you get exactly what you want. And like only an elf would be like, "Oh, fuck yeah.
yeah, I
I
deserve
deserve
this.
this." I just yeah. Whereas a dwarf looks at that and goes, "That doesn't make any sense actually." And like the thing that I love about how they portrayed Sauron in this in the Anatar version is he is like frequently like in the corner just like scowling evilly, but like no one seems to notice it.
Yeah,
But like Durin, of course, absolutely does. Yeah, that's so it's so perfect. Like his role there is just to immediately point out the obvious that no one else can see, because
yeah,
he's practical and he's not hoodwinked by these ideas. Yeah, it's like yeah, I love him. I love his character. I love the actor playing him. It's just perfect performance. I love his wife too. I'm blanking on her name right now. Disa maybe.
yeah.
Um,
Sounds right. I don't remember.
I really loved that whole interaction and that moment where she sings to the rocks and realizes that their mountain has stopped talking to them and the tragedy of that. Um, I guess the only part about it I really didn't like, and this is kind of the prequelitis of it at times. Like I don't know if I needed to see. It's not even that if I needed to see the Balrog. It's that like I swear to God they used like the same shots from the Lord of the Rings with the Balrog. Like he whips the Elder Durin with his whip in the exact same way,
Yeah,
like almost exactly. And it's like this is the we're like, okay, guys, I get it. It's the Balrog. Like I feel like we could have just yada yada over actually seeing it because everyone who is watching the show knows exactly what you've just released. Um, so that was one of the things that I kind of rolled my eyes at a little bit.
yeah. I agree. Basically, like, one thing I remember from the first season actually is like we see that one shot of the Balrog, and it's like it does like a big like hero pose and then like roars, and you're
Hmm.
like, what are you doing? Who is this for? And I kind of felt like that this season too, where a lot of its movements are kind of like too rule of cool,
Hmm.
not like practical. Like what? Yeah, I think part of my problem with the Balrog, and this is I don't know if this raises to the level of like a real complaint, but I'm just like, no one is taking this situation seriously enough. Like knowing, like now they know. I guess maybe before they didn't know that they had a Balrog in their mountain, but now that they know they have a Balrog in their mountain, and there was like a small landslide between them and where the Balrog was, they get you gotta deal with that or get out of there or something. Or maybe they don't know it's a Balrog. Maybe they don't know what a Balrog is. They just think it's
Yeah.
a monster. That's also plausible.
Yeah.
Um,
I, I,
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. Like, did the Balrog just go, "Oh, nuts, rocks"? All right.
and like the thing, like I literally thought, and maybe this is one of those like thoughts you have that you never question, but I was like, I just assumed the Balrog was literally like dormant for thousands and thousands of years, and like totally dormant. And like when they woke it up, it just immediately was like, oh, food, and then it just killed everyone.
Hmm.
Like that was my assumption of what happened there, and
Yeah.
instead it's this weird thing where it's like hunkering around in the mountain, not killing people. What is it doing?
Yeah. I mean, this is the problem is they it feels like a thing that was constructed from the finish line first. Like they
Yeah,
wanted the Elder Durin to have like a hero pose moment where he takes off the ring at the last minute, and then sacrifices himself to save his son while also simultaneously naming him king. Just wrap it up in a nice
yeah,
neat bow. They wanted that sequence and they got that sequence. And I think emotionally that sequence works, but yeah, it does leave you with like, okay, but what about the big monster under
yeah,
your mountain? Like that is eventually going to destroy everything and they're going to
yeah.
have to leave. Like that we know that's going to happen. So we're just kind of pressing pause on this and it's going to do it later. That feels a little weird.
Feels a little weird. I do I have enough faith in the show at this point that I'm sure they have some plan for how they're going to deal with the Balrog, obviously, for the next season. But I didn't particularly like how they handled it in either of these. It was like the first
Mhm.
season they wanted to hint it because they wanted to tease us with it. But I almost wish they hadn't done that at all, and this had been the first time we saw it, because then I would just feel like, oh, they've just awakened the Balrog.
Yeah.
Shit's gonna go down soon.
Right. Like I,
Um,
I think I think the moment where Disa is like chasing after that gem she bought and like feels the presence of it in the rock, like that was enough for
yeah,
me.
yeah,
So yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But I agree with you. Not the best moment. Let's talk about the Numenorians a little bit here. I said at the beginning that the show made me care about them for the first time, and it did. It did because Elendil's son got stabbed by that fucking asshole guy.
uh-huh.
I want to see that guy die so bad, and I know it's gonna happen, but we
Yeah,
didn't get to see it this season. I like it basically like what Numenor's role in this season is to essentially do like the Game of Thrones esque political intrigue section of the story. And I was just kind of surprised at how invested in it I was, despite like I remember ending last season and just not caring about the Queen character at all, not really vibing with this evil trade guy that's obviously going to try to take control. Just not really being invested in any of these characters whatsoever. And they won me over. I think maybe it's just like political intrigue just gets me, and I was just on board for it. My favorite part is when they were like, haha, we've tricked you into doing trial by drowning, and there's no way you'll get out of this. And then the sea monster just spits her out, and we're like, haha, gotcha. But then it's a little clunky, I guess, because they like seized control, then she seized it back, and then they found another way to seize it back again.
yeah, yeah. For me, so for my part, what won me over was like act. I don't know if it was like the performances kind of shifted in tone or if it was the story itself, but you really saw Elendil and the Queen on the back foot, suffering, like struggling,
Hmm.
and like it humanized them in a way where I think
Yeah.
maybe up until that point they had just been too stoic and above it all. Um, Even when the Queen went blind in the last season, it was almost like, well, she doesn't seem to mind. It didn't really give us that moment of, or at least maybe it did, and it just didn't work on me. The moment of like showing her feeling emotions about her state.
Hmm.
Whereas I feel like we got plenty of those scenes this season, and I really cared about Elendil, and I like I'm rooting for him now in a way that I wasn't before.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, you definitely care about him more, like seeing his son get stabbed. He's already thinks he's lost a seal door, and then he sees his other son get stabbed through the heart.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, um, let's just everyone just Scott's advice corner.
Uh huh.
You're holding a sword to someone's throat, and someone tells you, "Hey, stop, stop! Don't do that! Don't do that! Don't kill him!" And you go, "Okay, fine."
Uh huh.
Don't throw the sword down and then turn your back to the guy you were just about to kill.
Yeah.
Don't do that. That's a
He's
dumb choice.
he's just such a brave badass that he did that. Yeah, I had the same thought where, like, that was almost a moment where I was like, "Would you really do that?" And then I was like, "I don't care. This is a great moment. This is a great TV moment."
I
Um,
mean, it actually ties in perfectly with what you were talking about with Durin and the will he won't he of using the ring thing, right? Is like this kid did like the noble thing, right? Like
mhm.
you shouldn't just stab this guy just because he's a fucking asshole.
Yeah,
Like you should, and so he did the quote unquote right thing and was immediately punished for it.
yeah,
And that's like I think an interesting thing in this world of in this evil world, um where we're talking about the light and the steadfast existence of the light, and it's like, well, we're seeing it kind of get the shit kicked out of it, actually.
y
The bad guys are winning.
yeah, right. I mean, Boromir is maybe a better reference than like Aragorn because Boromir is our flawed but brave noble man who tries very very hard and still dies believing that everything is lost basically,
Hmm.
with just a shred of hope. um so yeah, I wonder what the overall tone of the season will be like. Here's one thing, not season but show. Like I wonder if the plan, like is the plan to the last episode is Galadriel's voiceover speech, uh you
I
know
think it has to be. I was thinking about that because, like, thinking about next season and the seasons. I don't know how many seasons they have planned for this thing, but I do know they spent $1 billion on it, so
hmm
they're probably going to try to get as much out of it as they can. Like, so we've got to forge the One Ring itself, right?
yep,
That has to happen. As you said, Numenor has to be destroyed. Eventually, the free peoples of Middle Earth are going to get together, and so yeah, I think we just end on the end of that war, and the destruction of Sauron,
yeah.
and we end with it. It does kind of make you sad. We're setting up this poor kid, Isildur, who is just like kind of a little kid, and you just know that like by the end of it, you're gonna do the dumbest fucking thing of all time, Isildur.
Yeah, and then you're going to be killed immediately after doing so basically,
Yeah, yeah.
in a random skirmish.
I do think that's where the show has to end. I guess where I'm excited is like I don't know what all they're gonna do in between those moments, right? Like we've got one more ring to forge, but what else are we gonna do?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I think that's the fun thing about. Well, okay, so here's an answer. Is we got all these characters, man. Like y- you don't have to do a lot with each character when you have this many characters. Um,
True.
which brings us to Gandalf. Do you think we're gonna go back to Nori? Do you think Nori is out of the story now?
Um, I think the hobbits are gonna find the Shire eventually. Like that seems to be what we're setting up, right? In this season we've got like they went traveling looking for this mystical land where everything's green and wonderful. It's like, okay, so that's the Shire. You're
Yeah,
gonna You're gonna find the Shire, and that's all the Hobbit people are gonna end at the Shire. Um, this is continuing to be the storyline I am just the least interested in. And it's weird because like I love the Hobbits so much in the Lord of the Rings, but for whatever reason, I don't give a shit about Nori in the show at all. I really don't. I tried so hard this season. Like it's not that there's never anything interesting they're doing with the Hobbits storyline. It's just like comparably, it's the thing I'm least interested in by far.
Yeah, there's very little of it, and I think what I liked, like it felt a little fan servicey, but I'm a fan, and I'd like to be serviced. Um, was like the moments where you would have Nori and Gandalf having some interaction, and it's like a clear call forward to some interaction that Gandalf has with hobbits later in the story. Uh,
See, that kind of stuff drove me crazy. That's the kind of prequelitis stuff that I really just kind of like, okay, okay. I will say, I want to give the show major props for introducing a character in the first episode that is clearly Gandalf, and then taking 20 hours before they allowed him to actually be Gandalf.
uh-huh. Yeah,
Like
that was
major
fun.
respect. Like everyone knew the second he showed up in the show. Like I was so convinced that I started doubting myself. It was like,
Right.
no, this is like too fucking obvious. But yeah, he's Gandalf.
That was the
Um,
thing the show people forget. It's funny because people have rewritten history about the first season where they'll be like, it was always obvious that Halbrand was Sauron. Were you crazy? And it's like, look, everyone suspected Halbrand was Sauron, but then you feel like it's too obvious,
mhm.
and they give you the red herring of this other mysterious guy who in the last episode of that season, people think is Sauron, and you're like, oh, you're going to trick us. And it's
Mhm.
going to turn out that the one we thought was Gandalf is actually Sauron. And then they were like, double psych. It was the guy you thought was Sauron. So, but it's just, I just, people pretend that they just always knew. I knew, of course I knew it was Sauron. It's like, no, you
Yeah,
didn't.
plus like we've said with some of the other stuff, like this we know the whole story. So like I don't actually care if
Yeah.
anything's obvious. Like I don't think the show is operating on a um I'm gonna trick you mentality.
Yeah.
Like it's just it's operating as if you kind of know the story already. And so like when Tom Bombadil shows up and he's wearing fucking Gandalf's wizard hat, like okay. Um
Uh-huh.
I guess, yeah. Uh speaking of which, Tom Bombadil.
Tom Bombadil. It's funny. I didn't think it was like the first moment he showed up. I was like, is that other wizard? Uh,
Radagast.
Radagast, yeah. And no, it's Tom Bombadil. And I was
Mhm,
like, it was funny because he doesn't quite match the characterization of Tom Bombadil in the Fellowship of the Ring, but I also don't care about this.
mhm.
Um, he's more like of the world, like he actually helps Gandalf. I mean, he helps the hobbits too, so it's not like anyway, whatever. It's cool. It's cool. I'm glad that Tom Bombadil now has a film appearance. He looks like Tom Bombadil, basically behaves like Tom Bombadil. He's very wise. It's very cool. I like him.
I loved him. I really did. This is the one kind of prequely thing that ultimately worked on me. And I think it's maybe because he wasn't actually in the movies, and so it wasn't specifically trying to do like Lord of the Rings callback stuff. I like his function in the story to also kind of help Gandalf on his quest. This is something you and I were talking about yesterday, though. I like the Gandalf character in this show. I was just a little confused as how they handled like the moment of his choice, right? So
Yeah.
the the show sets this thing up where Gandalf is like looking for his wizard staff. And Tom Bombadil is trying to instruct him on what he should do. He takes him out to this big canyon filled with sticks and is like, "Your staff is somewhere in there. Go get it." And then he's like, "Oh, but I'm like Luke from Star Wars, and I feel that my friends are in danger, and I need to stop my training to go help them out."
Uh-huh.
And he's like, "Oh, if you do that, that's the wrong. That's you. If you do that, you
Yeah.
can never get your stick ever again." And and then we leave that scene
Hmm.
of him like stuck at this crossroads, essentially, where he's like, "Do I choose between helping my friends, or do I choose between my destiny?" Is what the show has created for us. We leave. The next we see him, he's entering Hobbit Town,
Yeah.
and eventually like face to face with the Dark Wizard, who I guess. So you said this, and I looked this up that like we are there are five of the Maiar. That's what they're called, right? Um,
Yeah, the Istari are the
yeah.
specific ones who were sent. Yeah.
hmm Um, three of which we know the names of: Gandalf, Sauron, and Radagast. There are two unnamed ones, and by unnamed we just mean Tolkien never fleshed out those characters.
Right.
And so we think this Dark Wizard is one of those two unnamed ones, right? Because he's not. I was trying to like. This is one of those things where I was like, don't know if I was overthinking things, and it was like, oh, is this just supposed to be Saruman? Is that just who he is? Um, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't quite make sense to me that he would sort of reveal himself to be this like bad and manipulative and destroy the Hobbit's town, and then later they would just like make up and totally be friends, and he would,
Yeah, and then
he,
he'd be shocked at his betrayal. Like,
right,
yeah, yeah,
right,
yeah. Yeah, it could be. So anyway, like he goes from this moment of this moment of choice, and suddenly he's with the Dark Wizard, and the Dark Wizard basically says, "Join me and be powerful," and he says no. But again, I'm just not clear on. So did he was looking at the big pile of sticks in the canyon? Did he say, we didn't actually see him go, okay, no, I need to go find my friends? Like,
yeah,
I think the implication is that's what he did, because the end with Tom, it was like, it was a test. You wanted me to go after the important thing, which is my friends. You wanted me to do that. That was my destiny. Um, but I just felt like
yeah.
they didn't dramatize that actual choice good enough, because I was confused.
I was also exactly equally confused. I had the same exact reaction. My retrospective thought is that he does go wandering into the into the woods looking for his staff, accidentally wanders into the town, and then when the wizard offers him power, he rejects it in favor of his friends, and that's him making the right choice. Which I think when we talked about this the other day, you were like, so he makes the wrong choice and then he makes the right choice. And I was like, I actually think that's what it's supposed to be. But another part of me just feels like they cut out a scene for
Yeah.
time
Mhm.
because it doesn't flow to me at all.
It
Um,
doesn't. It doesn't. It feels very weird and clunky, which is very different from what a lot of the show feels to me. So
yeah.
yeah.
But
So I mean, I think overall, like I liked the Gandalf stuff because I liked the Tom Bombadil stuff, and so I generally enjoyed that. I liked seeing him get his stick at the end. That was nice.
yeah. And I like that actor. I find that
Yes.
even though it's the weird ineffable thing where he's not particularly like doing an Ian McKellen Gandalf caricature, but also I just totally buy him as being that character, you know?
hmm
And I can't even put my finger on why, but I
Yeah.
like
No,
it.
I think it's like this is why everyone thought he was Gandalf from like the first fucking moment, right?
Uh-huh.
Because he just like the way he carries himself, the presence he has, and is it just feels Gandalfy. I
Yeah.
want like okay, here's another like prequely thing that annoys me is when Tom Bombadil starts quoting future Gandalf quotes to Gandalf. I just
Yeah.
like I feel like that's a bridge too far with me. I just like I understand we're trying to have fun, and like this is a prequel to the Lord of the Rings, like, but that was one of the moments where another roll my eye moment. It was that, and like when we brought the Ents into it, and was like, oh, we're just like throwing everything in this thing now. It's like we're gonna have this whole thing where we run into a couple of Ents, including an Ent wife. Oh,
Yeah.
oh, you get to see an Ent wife. Oh, they're just an Ent.
They're just in it. Yeah. It's fun. That's funny because I also always thought that the end wives were going to be like meaningfully different. And it's just like, oh, it's a tree with like flowers.
Yeah, well, like that's the thing. It's like, what did Ent wives look like? And he's like, I don't remember. It's been so long since I've seen them. I was like, well, if they were just trees, then you probably be like, they were just trees.
Uh huh. They're,
But yeah,
yeah.
whatever. This is like this is all minor stuff, and ultimately, like, obviously, did not hurt my overall enjoyment of the show. But there were a few silly moments like that where I think, by the way, like we talked about the Numenorians, we didn't really talk about Isildur and his journey. Um, what did you think about that stuff? I really couldn't get into it very
No,
much.
I was generally pretty bored with it. I don't really care about his like little romance with the human
What are
woman.
we doing there? That felt so weird to me.
It felt like a different show.
Yeah.
I think what they were trying to do is make us care about Isildur, like because they knew he couldn't be in any of the main plot threads this season, so they had to give him something, and
Mhm.
it just wasn't very functional, and I
But I mean,
didn't care.
and maybe they can retroactively make us care if they bring this back around to something later. But like the way this plot line ends is like we're in love, but oh no, your husband lived.
Uh huh.
Bummer. And then it's like, oh, but we're in love anyway. So, oh no, but they wouldn't let you on the boat.
Uh
So
huh.
I'm okay. Bye. And
Well,
that's the end.
yeah, I suspect they're gonna hold that out, and then when he ends up coming back to Middle Earth,
Yeah.
then it's gonna matter.
Like, are we like the line? Are we meant to believe that this is Isildur's like future
I don't know.
wife?
Maybe so. Maybe so. I don't know. I mean, he's got to have a wife. Like we gotta, because we know the men of Numenor interbred with the men of whatever this area is called. I forget.
There's just like the Southlanders.
Yeah,
I
the
don't know.
Southlands.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know. That was one of the things that I thought was a little clunky for me. This is what I mean by this is definitely not like a perfect show. It's just like the things that we started talking about at the beginning of the episode were so fucking good
yeah,
that they more than made up for all the things that I didn't quite love.
I think the reason why you and I both binged it so hard is like it keeps a good clip. It's not like frenetic by any means, but it keeps a good clip. So if there's a part that you're just not into, it's not going to be that long before you're back to something you're really, really into.
Yeah, no, that's
Um,
true.
I was laughing to myself about the Ents because when the people are like running around in the woods and then there's like there's something getting them. What is it? There's something out here. And then we hear like trump, trump, and then we have that shot, and the shot is exactly the Peter Jackson shot of when Treebeard finds the hobbits, and it's like an
Yes.
overhead camera looms up over them, and I went, it's an ant, it's ants.
Yeah, it's it's
uh,
the it's the same shot. It's so weird how this show does this sometimes, and it's like I don't think they got the rights to all of the Howard Shore music, but
uh-huh.
they clearly like paid some of their $1 billion for some of the music because they will have moments where they'll kick in some of the Lord of the Rings theme stuff, and it's like it works on me every time because it's like the music, but it's like it must have been just a lot of money, and so they use it sparingly, or they
Mhm.
just recognize the power of it, and so they're artistically choosing to use it sparingly.
Yeah.
I do have one other complaint, and around it's around the action in this show.
Okay.
Um, I don't think it's very good.
Um, I'm I mostly agree. I will say the battle at Eregion I liked more than like all the other action.
So I did. I also felt that the geography of the Eregion battle was very confusing.
Hmm.
Like I didn't like, especially when Elrond shows up and then they like first of all, I just I can't get over charging at a dead sprint on horseback towards an enemy line, and then like 20 feet away, they reveal that Galadriel's there, and all horses stop.
Uh-huh.
Like that's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
But regardless, like so they treat with them, and then they come out, and then the battle rages, and then I just kind of lose track of like where the armies are. Um, and I just felt like geographically, I just kind of lost track of how the battles unfolding outside the walls of Eregion. Like I think the moment to moment action, like in within scenes, I think worked on me very well. But I
Yeah.
just kind of I was having a hard time like following like where is the line in the battle? Who is where are we going? And then like how did the entire elven force get like between the army and the wall? Like how did they manage to pull that one off? I don't know. It just I felt like Peter Jackson did a very, very good job at making the geography of the battles always very, very clear. You always kind of knew where everyone was and what the goal was, and when they were winning or losing, and I just felt like this was not as good.
Yeah, so I'm experiencing one of those funny things where you're totally right, but at the time I wasn't noticing any of that. But like when I think about the battle, I'm like, yeah, why did they only attack from like one side of the city? And it's like, well, maybe the answer is a geographical answer, but if so, they don't really portray it correctly.
Yeah.
Like it's not like it's Minas Tirith or Helm's Deep or something where there's clearly only one side you can attack from. Um,
Hmm.
it just didn't. Also, like this is the nittiest of nitpicks, but I'm like, I just don't think the plan of knocking the side of the mountain off to dam the river would have like practically worked.
I
Actually,
mean, so like it would take days to actually, like, even if you
yeah,
successfully dam the river, it would take a while for that water to drain to a level where you could just walk across, and it would be the worst marching in the world. Like, it would be muddy and like just like this is I messaged this to you as I was watching it,
uh
but
huh,
like I'm just like the orcs like dragging these siege weapons across this wet river floor, and it's just like the wheels would get so stuck in
yeah,
all the silt from the river, like all this like it's just like, oh my god, it would have been like quicksand.
yeah, yeah,
But it was a cool effect, like the realization of, like, we're behind this river and we're safe, and it's like, ah, no, you're not. We're gonna
yeah.
do this. Like that was a cool emotional beat.
Right. Right. That's the thing. And that's kind of the way in which I processed the show almost entirely was like this is a fantasy. This is elevated. Like it feels like the Silmarillion where it's like, look, these are magical people.
Hmm.
These like they can do things that wouldn't actually work in the real world because
Yeah,
they're magical and these are the olden days of yore. Um
and I think that's very true to Jackson's movies as well, right?
yeah.
Like I think the joke when I first saw Lord of the Rings when it came out was we were playing Warcraft 3, and we just said all the named characters are just hero classes from Warcraft 3, which, in that game, like the heroes needed like 100 normal units to kill. They were
Uh-huh.
by far the most powerful units and that's essentially what this is these like impossible hero units that can't be killed or almost can't be killed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I it
Um,
just there's one thing I liked while we're just talking about the battle. Like I liked the specific fight where Arondir has been like obsessively wanting to kill Adar for this entire show, basically,
mhm.
and finally like gets on the battlefield with him, and Adar like in a very like good action sequence just easily owns Arondir, and
Yeah.
um I just loved it. I just love that. It was well done.
It
Um,
Yeah, it was great. Arondir is such an interesting character because, like, again, this is one of those things where you can kind of maybe see the problems of writing and how they attempted to fix them is because they wanted him at that battle fighting Adar,
mhm.
but like that they had to get him there. And so he just kind of flits in between sequences with
Yeah,
different characters and just says, "Okay, that was fun. Bye. I have to go somewhere else now because I need to be somewhere else." Like you just kind of see it a little bit. Like I liked that character in the first season. I don't mind him in this season at all, but you can kind of tell like they recognized they had to move this character great distances in a short amount of time. And so they had to like have him in scenes in order to show that transition from one part of the story to the other so he could be there. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. He's one of those characters. I feel like we're gonna do something with him later that is not necessarily clear yet.
Mhm. I think so too.
Yeah,
Because his lover died horribly,
she died,
and
and
he's trying to be a son to that one kid. Theo is his name,
Theo
and he's just totally uninterested.
totally met. It's very funny because last season, last time we talked about this, I was totally sure that Theo was going to turn out to be his kid, and they literally give Theo a scene in this season where he says, "You're not my father." I was like, oh, I
I
still
think
haven't seen your
they
ears,
bonded
Theo.
by the end of it, right?
Yeah, I think they were. Yeah, I think they were good.
Yeah. All right, we've been going for 90 minutes. We could probably keep going, but is there anything more specific you wanted to talk about here before we wrap everything up?
Don't think so. I mean, I enjoyed this conversation because I really enjoyed the show, and I think they did a lot of really good stuff here.
Hmm.
Um, if you listen to this whole conversation, and you haven't watched the show. Watch the show.
Who has the 9 rings now? Where are the 9?
I think Sauron has them, unfortunately.
Oh yeah. Well, that's
Right?
what happens,
Am I
right? I
wrong?
mean, I'm pretty sure in the lore, Sauron sacks Eregion, takes the 9, and then gives them to the like
Yeah.
Sauron. I'm pretty sure in the lore, Sauron gave both the 7 rings to the dwarves and the 9 rings to the humans. Like it was just Sauron going, "Here you go." Um,
Hmm.
Obviously they changed that in this version of the story, but yeah, those humans got to get the. Where are we going to find the 9 human kings to get these rings? That's got to happen next
Well,
season.
yeah. So, I mean, another thing that has to happen is Sauron goes to Numenor and like corrupts Numenor, and like that's why the Numenorians attack Valar.
Yeah.
Um, and then he's destroyed. His body is destroyed, and that's why he can never take a fair form again. Um, that's that's why he's like a twisted, creature.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I'm assuming that's next season. Is that before or after he forges the ring?
I don't know. I don't
I
remember.
mean, that's got to happen soon-ish. I feel like. I feel like that's the next thing he does. Right?
Yeah,
He's completed the 9. Like all, the rings of power are made.
yeah,
Um.
but yeah, but like I think he probably tries to give them, or he probably gives them to some of the Numenorians.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure he ended up with them because Galadriel had them. He took them from her, and then he almost got her ring, but she managed to hold on to that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I had thought that the one dwarven ring was lost when he took the ring off and collapsed the tunnel, but I guess he threw it back towards Durin
yeah,
conveniently.
threw it very accurately. Yeah,
I mean, it is true that I don't know if I think some of the dwarven rings are just lost. I think.
by the end of eventually they are lost. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh well. We'll find out what this Lord of the Rings is going to do.
yep,
I did like the moments multiple times throughout the series, like, "You are the Lord of the Rings."
yeah. I like how they avoid saying his name. I thought that was fun.
Hmm.
And I honestly did like the recurring beat of "I have many names," partially because he loves his like notoriety, like
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Sauron loves how scared everyone is of him.
What an asshole. I
Yeah,
hope they kill him.
I hope they kill him. It's gonna take a while.
A long time.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right. Well, that was season 2 of Rings of Power. Man, I enjoyed that conversation. What a fun show. I can't wait to continue to talk about this show with you.
yeah, me too.
That is all we had for you folks this week. If you have any opinions on seasons 1 or 2 of the Rings of Power, please let us know. Unless you're going to accuse us of being shills for, please don't let us know.
Yeah,
I don't really care about that. It's the response to the show is so weird, man. Like people are so passionately against this thing, and it's like at its absolute worst, it's just fine.
yeah.
Like I don't get this at all.
I don't either.
Anyway,
Yeah,
reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or over on X at doofmedia, on Instagram at doofmedia, and on Reddit. That's reddit.com/r/doofmedia.
that's right. And if you're not already subscribed to the Doofcast, we encourage you to subscribe and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, YouTube, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
And if you like what we do here and want to support us, please consider becoming a patron of Doof Media. Head on over to patreon.com/Doof Media and pledge at any of the available levels. You get a whole bunch of bonus content, get to vote in book clubs, just a lot of fun things you do over there. You can be part of that community and you can help support us. So please check that out. That's patreon.com/Doof Media.
Yeah, also please consider giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Each review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content that we make here.
All right, folks, that is it for this week. I don't know what we're doing next week yet, Matt. Next week, I think, will be our final episode of 2024. because we'll probably take the week of Christmas off. But we've got to figure out what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it'll be something fun.
It will be. It will be. We'll see you then.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.